Hey guys, tonight we're sailing into calmer waters, a time of creaking ships, salt-stained clothes, and scurvy. We're diving into what life was really like for the average pirate during the golden age of piracy. Forget the buried treasure and flamboyant captains Hollywood sold you. The truth is, you probably wouldn't last a single week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1715. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, you're on a pirate ship in the middle of the Caribbean, and the hammock beneath you is swaying with the rolling waves. Your bed is a piece of canvas, strung between two hooks, shared with bedbugs, lice, and fleas that have made your body their permanent residence. There's no memory foam, no pillows, and definitely no clean sheets, just a rough blanket that reeks of sweat, rum, and seawater, assuming you even have one. Most pirates slept in their clothes, which hadn't been washed since the last time they were thrown overboard in a storm. You blink awake as the ship's bell clangs in the distance. It's the nautical version of an alarm clock, only louder and somehow even less merciful. 4 bells in the morning watch means it's 6 a.m. and your shift is about to start. Your home is the gun deck of a stolen merchant vessel, a cramped space with a ceiling so low you can't stand upright without banging your head on the wooden beams above. The smell? Oh, it's a fragrant symphony. A subtle blend of unwashed bodies, bilge water, gunpowder, tar, and something dead that might be a rat decomposing behind a barrel. Scented candles haven't been invented, and even if they were, open flames on a wooden ship filled with gunpowder would be, shall we say, inadvisable. You try to stretch, but immediately regret it because your joints ache from vitamin deficiencies and hard labor. You're 25 years old, which in pirate terms is practically ancient. Your back creaks like the ship's timbers in a storm, and your knees sound like cannonballs rolling across the deck. Getting out of your hammock is a gamble. The deck below is either wet from seawater that's leaked through the hull, or sticky from spilled grog, tobacco juice, and things you'd rather not identify in the dim light. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the maritime ecosystem. Oh, and privacy. What's that? You're sharing the gun deck with 30 other men, all waking up in hammocks strung so close together you're practically spooning the pirate next to you. There's no bedroom, no curtains, no me time, just communal everything. Welcome to morning on a pirate ship, where you're never truly alone because parasites, rats, and dozens of other unwashed men are always with you. And this is just how your day starts. It only gets worse from here. So, you've managed to crawl out of your canvas cocoon of misery. Congrats. Now, nature calls, and it's not calling politely. It's screaming. Here's the part where you start missing modern plumbing. There's no toilet, no seat, no toilet paper, no flush, not even a mildly resentful plunger in the corner. In the early 18th century, relieving yourself on a ship is an adventure, a balancing act, and often a public spectacle. If you're an ordinary pirate, your bathroom is the head of the ship, not a room called the head, the actual front of the ship where a small platform with a hole extends over the water. You sit or squat over this hole, holding onto a rope for dear life, while the ship rises and falls with the waves, threatening to dunk your exposed backside into the ocean with every swell. Miss your timing, and you might find yourself washed overboard, pants around your ankles, dignity abandoned somewhere between the Caribbean and the Atlantic. The worst part, it's completely exposed to the elements. Rain, wind, spray from the waves, they all join you in this most private moment. And during storms or battles, forget it. You're either holding it until you burst, or using a bucket in full view of your crewmates. Toilet paper, never heard of it. You're using a piece of frayed rope called the tow rag that hangs beside the hole, used by everyone, washed only by seawater and rarely replaced. Sometimes a bit of oakum, loose hemp fibers used for caulking the ship, if you're feeling fancy. If you're the captain, you might have the luxury of a chamber pot in your cabin. Privacy at last, except someone has to empty that pot, and that someone might hold a grudge. More than one mutiny has started over less. So whether you're an ordinary pirate or Captain Blackbeard himself, Maritime toileting is a humiliation ritual. It's cold, it's public, it's dangerous, and it's never not disgusting. One slip on a wave-washed deck, and you're face first in the Atlantic. And you still haven't brushed your teeth, but we'll get to that next. You survived the head. You deserve a reward, right? Maybe a nice breakfast. Something warm, delicious, comforting. Sorry, this is a pirate ship in 1715. Nothing is comforting here. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a grim affair. There are no pancakes, no coffee percolating, and certainly no fresh fruit smoothies. You shuffle to the galley, a small section of the gun deck with a sandbox where fire can be safely contained, to collect your daily ration. The ship's cook, usually chosen for this role because he's too injured, old, or useless for other tasks, hands you a moldy ship's biscuit. Congratulations. This is hardtack, a brick-like cracker made of flour, water, and salt, baked until it has the consistency of ceramic tile. It was made months, possibly years ago, and has been stored in barrels where weevils, maggots, and beetles have made it their home. You don't remove these creatures. That's valuable protein. You eat them along with your biscuit, which you have to soak in your morning grog to make it soft enough not to crack your remaining teeth. Speaking of grog, that's your beverage for the morning. A delightful mixture of water and rum. The water comes from barrels that have been sitting in the hold for weeks or months, growing algae and collecting rat droppings. The rum is added not for enjoyment, but to kill enough of the bacteria to prevent immediate dysentery. It's watered down significantly. The ship's purser makes sure of that. But it's still alcohol at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If you're lucky, there might be some salt pork or beef to go with your hardtack. This meat has been preserved in so much salt it's practically petrified, and has the taste and texture of a leather boot soaked in brine. Before eating it, you have to soak it in seawater to remove enough salt to make it merely inedible instead of lethal. Even then, it's often rancid, crawling with maggots, or green with mold. Again, you don't discard these additions. Food is too precious at sea. Fresh food is a distant memory just days after leaving port. Vegetables spoil, water turns foul, and everything gets damp and moldy in the humid Caribbean air. The only fresh protein might come from flying fish that land on deck, or, if the ship is stationary long enough, fishing lines might bring in a catch. But most days, it's hardtack, salt meat, and the occasional boiled dried peas or beans. This diet isn't just disgusting, it's deadly. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, begins to set in after just a few weeks at sea. Your gums bleed, your teeth fall out, old wounds reopen, and you begin to smell like decay before you're even dead. Many pirate captains try to raid not for gold, but for citrus fruit to keep their crew alive. A lemon could be more valuable than a Spanish coin when you're watching your skin blacken with rot. Breakfast doesn't energize you. It doesn't even please you. It merely postpones starvation for another day. And now that you're properly underfed, it's time to work like your life depends on it, because on a pirate ship, it absolutely does. So, you've choked down your breakfast of dubious origins, and now it's time to get dressed. Not that you have much choice in the matter. Your wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. One. It's a pair of canvas trousers that have been patched so many times, the original fabric is just a memory. A dirty linen shirt, stiff with salt, sweat, and blood. Yours or someone else's, who can tell any more? And, if you're lucky, a weathered wool jacket for colder nights. There's no such thing as a pirate uniform. The iconic image of pirates in matching striped shirts and bandanas is pure fiction. Pirates wore whatever they could steal, scrounge, or trade for. Most clothing came from raided merchant vessels, which means you might be wearing the clothes of a dead sailor, altered to fit your increasingly skeletal frame. Underwear? Maybe. A linen undergarment if you're one of the lucky few who remembers what cleanliness felt like. If not, you're going commando under those rough canvas trousers, leading to chafing and sores that never quite heal in the constant dampness of sea life. There's also no washing machine, no soap, and absolutely no laundromat in sight. So your clothes are stained, stiff with salt, and scented like a distillery that doubles as a fish market. Even if you wanted to wash them, how would you? Fresh water is too precious to waste on cleanliness, and washing clothes in seawater just leaves them stiff with salt. Some pirates would tie their clothes to a rope and drag them behind the ship, letting the seawater flush away the worst of the grime. But this was a rare luxury when the ship was moving slowly enough and the seas calm enough to retrieve them afterward. And don't get me started on shoes. If you own any, they're poorly fitted leather affairs that rot in the constant dampness. Many pirates just go barefoot, their soles toughened like leather from walking on rough wooden decks, slippery with tar and salt. Your feet develop cracks, splinters, and fungal infections that become as much a part of you as your increasingly questionable toenails. All this means one thing: your skin hates you. You itch constantly. Saltwater rashes, lice, fleas, bedbugs, fungal infections. They're all your constant companions. Everyone has them, from the lowliest deckhand to the captain himself. You'll be scratching your armpit with a marlin spike while taking orders from the quartermaster, and no one will even bat an eye. Your skin is raw from scratching and salt water, your scalp a battleground of parasites. And if you develop a serious infection, well, we'll get to the ship's surgeon later. For now, just know that amputations are more common than antibiotics, seeing as the latter haven't been invented yet. Now that you're dressed in discomfort and wrapped in parasites, it's time to head up on deck and start working yourself to an early, watery grave. Now that you're fully dressed in itches and damp canvas, it's time to consider your dental situation. Except you don't have one, because on a pirate ship, dental care isn't a priority. It's not even a concept. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. The idea of oral hygiene is about as common as bathing, which is to say, practically non-existent. Some sailors might chew on a frayed twig or rub their teeth with a bit of cloth, but for the most part, your teeth are on their own, and they're not doing well. By the time you're in your mid-20s, assuming you've been at sea for a few years, your smile looks like a picket fence after a hurricane. Teeth are missing, cracked, or blackened with decay. Gums are swollen, bleeding, and receding, the early signs of scurvy that will eventually cause your teeth to fall out entirely. Sugar, while not yet as common as it will become, is still present in your diet through the rum ration, combined with the starchy hardtack that sticks to your teeth and the complete absence of cleaning. Your mouth becomes a paradise for decay. You have more rot in your mouth than in the ship's bilge, and that's saying something. Toothaches, they're your constant companion, like the ship's cat or the eternal creaking of timbers. The pain ranges from dull throbbing to the kind that makes you consider throwing yourself overboard just to end the misery. And the treatment: if you're lucky, the ship has rum strong enough to numb the pain temporarily. If you're unlucky but desperate, there's always the ship's carpenter with his pliers. No anesthesia, no sterilization, just a firm grip and a quick yank. Try not to scream too loudly. It's bad for morale. Infected teeth are walking death sentences. Without antibiotics, an abscess can spread to your jaw, then your blood, leading to a painful, delirious end. That toothache that sends us to a dentist today could be your funeral in 1715. Your crewmates would simply wrap you in a piece of old sailcloth, maybe say a few words if they liked you, and tip you over the side for the sharks to finish what your molar started. And there's no relief on the social front either. Everyone's breath smells like a cemetery at low tide. It's not even noticed anymore. The stench of unwashed bodies, rotting teeth, and gum disease is just the perfume of maritime life. If you're looking for romance at sea, you're not judged by your smile. You're judged by your strength, your loyalty, and whether you can still climb the rigging with a knife between your teeth. In short, your mouth is a disaster zone, and there's no rescue coming. Now, with your teeth aching and your stomach churning from breakfast, it's time to start your day's labor, because nothing takes your mind off dental pain like hauling on a rope until your hands bleed. Time to head to work. Except there's no office, no desk, no coffee break, and no healthcare plan. Your job on a pirate ship is simple. Do as you're told or face consequences that range from flogging to being marooned on a deserted island with a bottle of rum and a loaded pistol with one shot. Congratulations, you're at the bottom of the maritime food chain. Your work day begins with all hands on deck, a literal call that brings every able-bodied pirate topside. The jobs aboard ship are endless and exhausting, hauling on lines to adjust sails, scrubbing the deck with holy stone, a sandstone block on your hands and knees until your knuckles bleed, pumping water from the bilge to keep the ship from sinking, a constant task on leaky wooden vessels, and repairing torn sails with needles that pierce your calloused fingers. There's no weekend. There's no clocking out. There's only the tyranny of the sea and sky, the endless cycle of watches that keep the ship running 24 hours a day. You might work the morning watch, the afternoon watch, the dog watch, or the dreaded middle watch from midnight to 4 a.m., where you strain your eyes in the darkness, watching for reefs, enemy ships, or changes in the weather. The work is brutal. Climbing the rigging in high seas means hanging onto tarred ropes with your bare hands while the ship pitches beneath you, threatening to throw you 50 feet to the deck or into the ocean. Every rope, every pulley, every sail adjustment requires raw human muscle. There are no motors, no hydraulic systems, just you and your increasingly skeletal crewmates hauling together while the ship's officers bark orders. No one cares if you're tired. No one's asking about your work-life balance. If you're too slow, too weak, or too sick to work, you're not just useless, you're a liability. The ship's articles, the pirate code that governs life aboard, might provide compensation for injuries sustained in battle, but day-to-day accidents, that's just bad luck. Break a leg falling from the rigging, and you'd better hope it heals straight enough for you to work again. If not, your next career move might be a shark bait. The only breaks come during calm seas when the work eases slightly. Then you might mend your clothes, gamble with dice or cards for your meager possessions, or listen to those few crewmates who can read share stories from tattered books. Music is one of the few genuine pleasures. Sea shanties aren't just folk songs, they're work songs, helping coordinate the rhythm of hauling lines and raising anchors. And when you're not working, you're probably standing watch, because a ship at sea is vulnerable, and vigilance is survival. 4 hours on, 4 hours off, around the clock, until the lines between days blur like the horizon at dusk. So you grip the tarred line, ignore the splinters, and keep hauling, because on a pirate ship, your job isn't a career. It's a sentence, and your only retirement plan is a watery grave, or, if you're exceptionally lucky, enough stolen gold to disappear before the authorities catch up with you. Now that your back is on fire from hauling lines and climbing rigging, let's talk about the weather. Because at sea, temperature isn't just a matter of comfort, it's a matter of survival. And the elements are constantly trying to kill you in creative ways. Let's start with the cold. Pirates didn't just operate in the balmy Caribbean, they followed shipping routes across the Atlantic, around the African coast, and into waters where the cold bites deep. There's no insulation on a wooden ship, no heating system besides a small, carefully monitored galley fire that's more for cooking than warmth. The wind that fills your sails also cuts through your thin clothing like knives. Night watches in northern waters are exercises in controlled freezing. Your fingers become so numb you can barely tie knots or handle weapons. Your feet, often wet from waves washing over the deck, develop chilblains and frostbite. You might stuff straw or rags into your shoes if you have them for insulation. But nothing keeps the maritime cold at bay for long. Below decks offers little relief. The wooden hull conducts cold from the water, creating a damp chill that settles in your bones. You sleep huddled with other men for warmth, sharing blankets and body heat in a tangle of unwashed humanity. It's not intimate, it's survival. Now, fast forward to the tropical heat. Surely that's better, right? Wrong. The Caribbean sun is merciless, beating down on the deck until the wood is hot enough to burn bare feet. There's no shade except for the sails, no relief from the heat except for the occasional breeze or rain shower. Below decks in tropical waters becomes an oven, airless and suffocating. The heat combines with the stench of unwashed bodies, rotting food, and the ever-present bilge to create a miasma that makes breathing itself an ordeal. You sweat constantly, but with limited fresh water, you can't wash the salt away. Your skin develops rashes and sores from the constant dampness and friction. The sun doesn't just make you uncomfortable, it burns you to a crisp. No sunblock, no proper hats, no protective clothing. Your skin blisters, peels, and eventually tans to a leathery hide, aging you decades in just a few years at sea. Sunstroke is common, causing hallucinations, seizures, and sometimes death, especially among new pirates not yet accustomed to the relentless exposure. And then there are the storms. The Atlantic hurricane season brings monsters that can shred sails, snap masts, and sink ships in minutes. When a storm hits, there's no running inside to safety. You're ordered up the rigging in the worst of it, fighting to furl sails while the ship pitches at impossible angles, and waves the size of mountains try to wash you overboard. Rain turns to stinging needles at high wind speeds. Lightning strikes the tallest thing around, which happens to be your ship's mast, possibly while you're clinging to it. The deck becomes a skating rink of slick wood and salt water, where one wrong step means a broken bone or a quick trip overboard. And the one thing that never changes, no matter the weather, you still have to work. Heat stroke, hypothermia, and drenching rain are not excuses for neglecting your duties. The ship comes first, your comfort last, and your survival somewhere in between. Welcome to climate control, pirate style. There is none. Feeling thirsty? Need to freshen up? Want to splash a little water on your face to wash away the salt and sweat? Too bad. On a pirate ship, water isn't just scarce. It's precious, rationed, and often deadly. Let's start with drinking. Fresh water is stored in wooden casks in the ship's hold. Sounds reasonable, until you consider that these wooden containers leak, grow algae, and collect whatever falls, crawls, or dies in them. Within days of setting sail, your drinking water turns green, develops a film on top, and begins to smell like a swamp. You're rationed perhaps 3 cups of this questionable liquid per day. Not 3 cups whenever you want them, 3 cups total to drink, to clean yourself, if you're particularly fastidious, and to do anything else requiring fresh water. And this is assuming your water hasn't run out entirely, which happens with alarming frequency when voyages last longer than expected, or rainfall is scarce. This is why rum is so important. It's not just for pleasure, it's for survival. Alcohol kills some of the bacteria in that fetid water, making it less likely to kill you immediately. Your morning grog isn't a luxury, it's primitive water purification. Rainwater becomes liquid gold. During storms, pirates would spread canvas to catch rainfall, fill every available container, and drink directly from puddles on the deck, despite the tar, salt, and bird droppings that might be mixed in. It was still better than the stagnant barrels below. What about bathing? Surely, sailors must rinse off the salt and sweat sometimes. In theory, yes. In practice, almost never. Some pirate ships had rules about cleanliness, but most didn't. The concept of regular bathing was foreign to many 18th century people anyway, but it was especially rare at sea where fresh water was too valuable to waste on washing. Instead, you might rinse with seawater, which leaves you sticky with salt, or take advantage of tropical rain showers for a quick freshening up. Some pirates would jump overboard on calm days for a swim, but this wasn't just for cleanliness. It was also to reduce the flea and lice population in their clothing and hair, which would drown in the salt water, temporarily, at least. The result of this water scarcity is constant thirst. Your lips crack and bleed from dehydration. Your tongue feels swollen in your mouth. Your urine turns dark yellow, then brown. Constipation becomes chronic, and all the while, you're surrounded by water, billions of gallons of it, all completely undrinkable. Drinking seawater in desperation only makes things worse, driving you toward hallucinations and death faster than drinking nothing at all. Some pirates, in the final stages of thirst, would drink their own urine, blood from turtles or fish, or even the liquid from the eyeballs of captured sea turtles, anything to moisten their swollen tongues. So, whether it's going in your mouth, on your body, or into your cooking pot, water on a pirate ship is less of a basic right and more of a luxury item, carefully measured, jealously guarded, and never, ever taken for granted. Next time you turn on a tap and clean water pours out, raise a glass for our pirate ancestors. They would have committed multiple murders for what you just let run down the drain while brushing your teeth. So, you drank the water. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just caught your hand in a pulley, or took a splinter the size of a small dagger in your foot. Either way, you're sick or injured. You need help. You need a doctor. Too bad you're on a pirate ship where medicine is really just improvised butchery with a side of rum. Let's start with the medical professional, the ship's surgeon. Unlike the romantic idea of physicians taking to piracy, most pirate surgeons were former barbers, butchers, or just sailors who had watched amputations and thought, I could do that. Their medical training consisted of experience, hearsay, and whatever outdated medical texts might be on board. The surgeon's tools would make a torture chamber look welcoming. Rusty saws for amputations, crude forceps for extracting musket balls, curved needles for stitching wounds, and a terrifying assortment of knives and probes. Sterilization wasn't a concept yet, so these tools would be used on patient after patient, wiped clean on a rag at best. The surgeon's quarters doubled as the operating room, usually a small space below decks where the light was poor, and the rolling of the ship made precision work nearly impossible. During battles, surgeries would be performed on the orlop deck, the lowest part of the ship, where ambient noise would supposedly muffle the screams of the patients. Got a fever? First, you'll be diagnosed with an imbalance of humors, that ancient and completely incorrect medical theory that persisted well into the 18th century. The treatment, bloodletting, of course. The surgeon would open a vein and drain your precious blood into a bowl, weakening you further when you're already fighting an infection. If that doesn't work, perhaps you need to vomit out the bad humors. Induced vomiting and violent purging were common treatments, frequently making the patient weaker and more dehydrated. Break a bone or dislocate a joint. If you're lucky, your surgeon might actually be skilled at setting and splinting. If you're unlucky, you'll heal crooked and be partially crippled for life. If you're really unlucky and it's a compound fracture with the bone protruding through the skin, amputation is your most likely outcome. Amputation, the signature medical procedure of the age. No anesthesia, except a leather strap to bite on and as much rum as you can stomach. Speed was considered the most important surgical skill. A good surgeon could remove a limb in under 2 minutes, as the patient was likely to die from shock or blood loss if the procedure took too long. The actual technique? The surgeon would cut through skin and muscle with a curved knife, saw through the bone with a serrated blade, then tie off major blood vessels with thread, often silk or catgut. The stump would be cauterized with hot tar or a heated iron to seal smaller blood vessels, then bandaged with whatever clean or cleanish cloth was available. Survival rates were shockingly low. Infection claimed many amputees within days. The combination of non-sterile techniques and the close quarters of a ship creating perfect conditions for gangrene and sepsis. Those who survived might find themselves with a crude peg leg or hook fashioned by the ship's carpenter, the origin of those pirate stereotypes that actually have some basis in reality. For more minor injuries, treatment was equally primitive. Wounds were stitched with sail needles and thread. Burns, common in the ship's galley or during cannon fire, were treated with grease or oil. Hernias, frequent among men constantly lifting heavy loads, were treated with tight bandages and reduced activity if possible. The one area where pirate medicine occasionally stumbled into effectiveness was in the treatment of scurvy. Some captains, through observation rather than understanding the science, realized that citrus fruits prevented the disease. Raids on Spanish settlements often targeted fruit orchards as much as treasure houses, and smart pirates would stock limes, lemons, and oranges when they could, extending both the range of their voyages and the lives of their crew. So yes, on a pirate ship, medicine is less about healing and more about surviving the treatment. After a long day of labor, lice, and the looming threat of amateur surgery, it's finally time to eat. You shuffle to the galley, stomach growling, ready for the one joy left in life, a warm meal. Bad news, your meal is probably trying to kill you too. Let's begin with the basics. Food preservation at sea is an imperfect science at best. There's no refrigeration, no freezer, just salt, air drying, and the vague hope that covering food in vinegar or brine might keep it edible for more than a week. Your meat, if you're lucky enough to have any, is salt pork or beef that's been packed in barrels of salt for months, possibly years. This preserved meat is so salty and tough that it must be soaked in seawater for hours before cooking, and even then, it has the texture and flavor of leather boots. It's often infested with weevils, maggots, or worse, but these are simply picked out, or, in times of severe protein shortage, eaten along with the meat. The sailor's nickname for this meat was salt horse, and the comparison to saddle leather was not accidental. Fish might be caught fresh when the ship is stationary or moving slowly, providing brief respite from the preserved provisions. But fishing from a moving ship is difficult, and stopping a ship solely for fishing is rare unless food stores are critically low. Some ships kept turtles alive on board, flipped on their backs on the deck, a living larder that would stay fresh until cooking. Bread is a cornerstone of the pirate diet, but it's not the soft, aromatic loaves you might imagine. It's hardtack, those stone-like biscuits we mentioned at breakfast, and they're no more appealing at dinner. They're often so infested with weevils that they seem to move on their own, and so hard they must be soaked in liquid, usually soup, grog, or seawater, before they can be chewed without cracking your teeth. Vegetables, only if they're dried, pickled, or somehow preserved. Dried peas and beans might be boiled into a starchy soup. Sauerkraut, if your captain is forward thinking about preventing scurvy, might make an appearance. Onions and garlic keep relatively well and serve the dual purpose of flavoring the otherwise bland food and allegedly warding off disease. Fresh produce is a fading memory just days after leaving port. The last fresh apples or cabbage are consumed quickly, often reserved for the captain's table, while the rest of the crew watches their vitamin supply steadily deplete. This is why scurvy was so common. The human body can only go about 2 months without vitamin C before symptoms begin to appear. Cooking itself is a dangerous proposition on a wooden ship. The galley fire is contained in a sandbox or brick enclosure, carefully monitored to prevent it from spreading. On rough seas, cooking might be suspended entirely. Better to eat cold, hard rations than risk burning the ship down. The ship's cook works in sweltering conditions, constantly battling the motion of the vessel while trying to prepare food for dozens of hungry men. The resulting meals are basic, to put it kindly. Stews of salt meat and dried legumes, hardtack soaked in broth, perhaps a simple pudding made from flour, fat, and whatever dried fruit might be available. Everything is overcooked, underseasoned, except for salt, which is excessive, and served in wooden bowls or trenchers that are rarely cleaned beyond a quick wipe. You eat communally, sitting on the deck or crowded around rough tables below, using your own knife and spoon if you have them, or just your fingers if you don't. There's no such thing as dining etiquette. You eat quickly, guard your portion, and don't comment on the quality unless you want trouble with the cook, who might just decide you need less food tomorrow. Water to wash it down, limited and foul. Grog, available but diluted. The rum ration is carefully controlled by the quartermaster, enough to keep morale up and kill some bacteria in the water, but not enough to keep the crew drunk and useless. Food isn't just a necessity, it's politics. Pirates are democratic about many things, but food can spark mutinies. That's why many pirate codes explicitly state that all men get equal rations, with perhaps only the captain and the surgeon getting slightly better quality. Unlike naval vessels where officers dined on fresh meat while sailors subsisted on gruel, pirates understood that food equality prevented unrest. So, as you sit on a coil of rope on the main deck, chewing your salt horse and weevil-infested hardtack by the fading tropical light, remember that this isn't just dinner. It's a test of endurance. And the prize for passing? You get to do it all again tomorrow. You've survived another day of back-breaking labor, narrowly avoided scurvy, and choked down food that would make a prison meal look like fine dining. Now comes the moment you've been waiting for, leisure time. Except leisure on a pirate ship is less about relaxation and more about slightly different forms of misery. Let's start with the most famous pirate pastime, drinking. Yes, pirates drank rum, but not in the carefree, swinging from the chandeliers way movies portray. Rum was rationed carefully, usually diluted with water to make grog. Getting blind drunk was generally prohibited while at sea. A ship needed alert crew members to function, and drunkenness could be punishable under many pirate codes. The real heavy drinking happened when pirates made port in lawless places like Port Royal, Jamaica, or Nassau in the Bahamas. There, the crew might receive their share of plunder and proceed to spend it all on alcohol, gambling, and prostitutes in a matter of days. These sprees weren't just for fun, they were strategic. Captains knew that broke sailors would be more willing to sign on for another voyage. Back on the ship, gambling was a common way to pass time. Dice, card games, and betting on basically anything provided entertainment and a way to redistribute the meager possessions of the crew. A sailor might win a silver button one night and lose his only spare shirt the next. Some pirate codes actually prohibited gambling, for high stakes to prevent the violent disputes that inevitably followed. Music was one of the few genuine pleasures available. Almost every pirate ship had at least one crew member who could play a fiddle, accordion, or tin whistle. Evening music sessions on calm nights offered rare moments of harmony, both musical and social. Songs told stories of home, lost loves, great victories, or humorous misadventures. Sea shanties weren't just work songs. They were oral histories and emotional outlets. Storytelling filled many evening hours. Pirates came from all walks of life and all corners of the world, bringing with them tales of distant lands, legendary treasures, and supernatural encounters. Some could read and would share tattered books, adventure stories, religious texts, or navigational guides with an audience of enraptured shipmates, many of whom were illiterate. Physical games helped maintain strength and combat boredom. Wrestling matches, tests of strength, and crude forms of boxing gave men a way to establish hierarchy, settle disputes, or simply burn off excess energy. These contests often resulted in injuries that the ship's surgeon would then have to treat, creating a cycle of violence and patching up that defined much of pirate life. Sleep, when it finally came, was brief and uncomfortable. The watch system meant that at any given time, a significant portion of the crew was working, while others tried to rest in preparation for their next shift. Your hammock, strung tightly in the crowded gun deck, offered minimal comfort, but it was preferable to the hard deck. The constant noise made true rest elusive. The creaking of timbers, the slap of waves against the hull, the snoring and muttering of your fellow pirates, the scurrying of rats across the beams above, these were your lullabies. Add to that the possibility of being woken at any moment by the cry of all hands if weather changed or a sail was sighted, and you have a recipe for chronic sleep deprivation. Dreams, when they came, were often nightmares, replays of battles, storms, or the hanging of former crewmates. Many pirates drank specifically to mute these dreams, creating a cycle of alcohol dependency that was as much self-medication as recreation. Privacy for more intimate activities was nearly non-existent. Unlike the romantic notion of pirates having cabins with locking doors, most lived in communal spaces where every cough, whisper, and movement was heard by others. Any personal relationships developed in this environment were conducted with the full knowledge of the crew, who might be supportive, indifferent, or hostile, depending on the specific pirate society. So yes, leisure time on a pirate ship wasn't about relaxation. It was about finding tiny moments of humanity in an inhuman environment, brief escapes from the reality of a harsh existence where tomorrow might bring wealth, starvation, or a naval noose. As you finally drift off to sleep surrounded by snoring, farting, muttering men in various states of hygiene and sobriety, you can at least console yourself with one thought. You survived another day of pirate life. Not everyone does. At this point, you've made it through the lice, the scurvy, the amateur surgery, and the constant threat of falling from the rigging to your death. But now, we need to address the elephant on the ship, or rather, what pirates actually did for a living. Because, contrary to popular belief, they weren't spending all their time burying treasure and making people walk the plank. Let's talk about piracy as a profession, which was less about swashbuckling adventure and more about carefully calculated risk, maritime knowledge, and often mind-numbing boredom, punctuated by brief moments of terror. First, the boring part, searching. Pirates spent vast amounts of time simply looking for potential prey. This meant patrolling shipping lanes, watching port entries from a distance, or gathering intelligence in taverns about merchant vessels' schedules. Days, weeks, sometimes months might pass without a suitable target. During these periods, the crew would grow restless, supplies would dwindle, and the captain's leadership would be tested. When a potential prize was spotted, the hunt began. Contrary to Hollywood imagery, pirates didn't immediately raise the Jolly Roger and charge in with guns blazing. That would have given their prey ample warning to flee or prepare defenses. Instead, they often flew false flags, appearing as merchant vessels or naval ships of various nations until they were close enough to strike. The actual attack was all about intimidation. The black flag would be raised at the last moment, cannons run out, and weapons displayed. The goal wasn't necessarily to fight. It was to frighten the target into surrendering without resistance. Battles damaged valuable cargo, killed potential new crew members, and risked the pirates' ship and lives. A peaceful surrender was always preferred. This is where the pirate reputation for brutality came in handy. Stories of pirates' cruelty were often exaggerated, or spread by the pirates themselves as a form of psychological warfare. If merchant crews believed they would be tortured if they resisted, but treated reasonably if they surrendered, the choice was obvious. If intimidation failed and battle became necessary, it was quick, chaotic, and extremely dangerous. Pirates would attempt to position their ship alongside the target, called coming alongside, to fire a broadside of cannons, aiming not to sink the vessel, but to damage its rigging and sails to prevent escape. Then came boarding. Pirates would throw grappling hooks to secure the ships together and swarm across using planks, or simply jumping the gap. They would be armed with pistols, good for one shot before requiring lengthy reloading, cutlasses, short, curved swords ideal for the confined spaces of a ship, and various improvised weapons. The fighting was brutal, hand-to-hand combat in extremely tight quarters, often on a slippery, pitching deck. Wounds were gruesome. Cutlasses could remove limbs, splinters from cannon fire could cause horrific injuries, and fire was an ever-present danger, as hot cannon wadding could ignite wooden surfaces. Let's say your crew was victorious and captured a merchant vessel. Now comes the part you've been waiting for, the treasure, except it's probably not jewels and gold coins. Most merchant ships carried practical cargo, textiles, sugar, tobacco, lumber, livestock, dried fish, grain, or manufactured goods. Pirates would take what they could use directly, especially food, ammunition, medical supplies, and items that could be easily sold or traded. Actually, selling stolen cargo was complicated. Pirates needed fence operations in port cities, corrupt merchants who would buy goods without asking questions, and handle the laundering of these items back into legitimate markets. This is why pirates established relationships with governors and merchants in places like Port Royal or Nassau. They needed these networks to convert stolen cargo into usable currency. The actual dividing of spoils followed a surprisingly democratic and organized system. Most pirate crews had written articles that specified exactly how loot would be distributed. Typically, the captain received between 1.5 and 2 shares, the quartermaster 1.5 shares, other officers like the sailing master, gunner, and surgeon 1.25 shares, and regular crew members 1 share each. Additional compensation was specified for injuries, 600 pieces of 8 for the loss of a right arm, 500 for a left arm, 400 for a right leg, and so on. A macabre early form of workers' compensation. What about prisoners? Contrary to the walking the plank myth, pirates rarely killed captives needlessly. Dead merchants couldn't spread tales of pirate ferocity, and dead sailors couldn't be recruited to join the pirate crew, a common practice, especially for those with valuable skills like carpentry, navigation, or medicine. Instead, prisoners might be confined briefly, sometimes questioned for intelligence about other ships or naval movements, and then released or even set ashore in their own rowboats. Some were offered the chance to go on the account, joining the pirate crew, which many accepted, given that life as a merchant sailor was often equally brutal, but far less profitable. As for the captured ships, they might be incorporated into the pirate fleet if they were faster or better armed than existing vessels. Otherwise, they would be stripped of valuable fittings and either abandoned or burned, depending on whether the pirates wanted to leave evidence of their activities. So, no, pirates weren't constantly engaged in dramatic sea battles and treasure hunting. They were essentially maritime thieves, operating a criminal business with surprisingly well-developed organizational structures, risk management strategies, and profit-sharing agreements. Now that we understand what pirates actually did for a living, let's examine how they governed themselves. Because the organizational structure of a pirate ship was perhaps the most democratic workplace in the 18th century world, and that's saying something. Unlike merchant or naval vessels, where captains ruled with near absolute authority, pirate ships operated under what historians now recognize as a primitive form of constitutional democracy. Each crew established their own set of articles, essentially a constitution that everyone agreed to, and often signed or marked. These articles varied from ship to ship, but they typically outlined rights and responsibilities, compensation for injuries, rules about fighting and gambling, punishments for various offenses, and the all-important method of dividing plunder. They weren't just guidelines, they were binding agreements that even the captain had to follow. Speaking of captains, their power was remarkably limited compared to their legitimate counterparts. Pirate captains held absolute authority only during chase and combat, when quick decision-making was essential. At all other times, major decisions, including where to sail, what ships to attack, and when to clean the vessel, were put to a vote among the entire crew. Captains could be deposed if they were deemed too cautious, too reckless, or simply disliked by the majority. This happened with surprising frequency. Captains served at the pleasure of their crew, not the other way around. The true power behind the throne was often the quartermaster, who acted as a check on the captain's authority and represented the interests of the crew. He was responsible for maintaining discipline, resolving minor disputes, and dividing provisions and plunder. In many ways, he was a combination of executive officer, human resources manager, and union representative. Justice was swift and public. Minor offenses might be punished with reduced rations, extra duties, or flogging. Major violations of the Articles, especially theft from crewmates, desertion during battle, or concealing plunder, could result in marooning or execution. Marooning wasn't just abandonment on any convenient beach. Pirates deliberately chose small, isolated islands with minimal resources. The condemned would typically be given a small amount of water, a weapon, often a pistol with a single shot, and sometimes a bottle of rum. Not enough to survive, just enough to choose between a slow death from exposure and thirst, or a quicker end by suicide. The most severe punishment was reserved for traitors, those who informed on their fellow pirates to authorities. They might be keel-hauled, dragged under the ship from one side to the other, being scraped against barnacles and often drowning in the process, or slowly tortured to death as an example. But daily life wasn't all crime and punishment. Pirates created a relatively egalitarian society where men of various races, nationalities, and backgrounds could advance based on skill rather than birth. A former slave could become a respected navigator. An illiterate fisherman could rise to captain if he demonstrated leadership and strategic thinking. This equality had limits, of course. Women were extremely rare on pirate ships. The few documented female pirates, like Anne Bonny and Mary Red, disguised themselves as men for most of their careers, and while pirates of African descent could achieve positions of respect and authority, about 25 to 30% of some crews were black, they weren't completely free from the racism of their era. What's particularly interesting about pirate governance is how it emerged from the brutal conditions of naval and merchant service. Many pirates were former Navy sailors who had experienced the tyranny of naval captains, the arbitrary punishments, inadequate food, and miserable pay. Piracy offered not just better financial prospects, but a voice in their own governance. Some historians argue that pirate ships represented an early form of worker rebellion against mercantilist capitalism. By seizing the means of maritime production, the ships themselves, and creating their own rules of compensation and authority, pirates established what might be called floating labor collectives, operating outside the emerging colonial economic system. So the next time you think of pirates as merely lawless criminals, remember that they were also inadvertent political revolutionaries who created surprisingly sophisticated systems of democratic self-governance a century before the American or French revolutions. They just happened to combine these progressive social structures with theft, violence, and occasionally truly terrible hygiene. If you've managed to navigate the daily challenges of food poisoning, amateur surgery, and the constant threat of naval pursuit, you might be wondering, what was the end game for pirates? How long could this lifestyle last? And what happened when it was over? The reality is stark. The career expectancy for most pirates was shockingly brief. The average pirate in the Golden Age, roughly 1650 to 1730, might last 2 to 3 years before meeting one of several unpleasant fates. Death in battle was common, though though perhaps not as frequent as you might imagine. Remember, pirates preferred intimidation to actual fighting. Still, when combat did occur, it was brutal, and medical care was primitive. A minor wound could become infected. A serious one was often fatal, even if the initial injury wasn't. Disease claimed more pirates than combat ever did. Yellow fever, malaria, dysentery, typhus, the tropical regions where pirates operated, were breeding grounds for deadly illnesses. Add to that the close quarters of ship life, poor nutrition, and limited medical knowledge, and you had a perfect storm of pathogenic opportunity. Accidents were another major killer. Falls from rigging, drowning during naval maneuvers, injuries from cannon operation, burns from the galley fire. The working environment was hazardous in countless ways. Even routine tasks like careening a ship, tilting it on its side to scrape barnacles from the hull, could result in crushing injuries or drowning. But perhaps the most famously piratical end came at the hands of legal authorities. Capture by naval vessels or pirate hunters usually led to a short trial, followed by public execution. Hanging was the most common method, carried out at prominent locations like London's Execution Dock or Port Royal's Gallows Point. These weren't just executions. They were theatrical spectacles designed to deter others. Pirates were often left hanging in iron cages or chains, called gibbeting, until their bodies rotted away, a grim warning to sailors considering the pirate life. The bodies of particularly notorious pirates like Blackbeard had their heads removed and displayed on poles at harbor entrances. The legal process itself was largely a formality. Pirates were considered hostis humani generis, enemies of all mankind, a special legal category that stripped them of normal rights. Trials were quick, evidence was often circumstantial, and the outcome was virtually guaranteed. Many pirates didn't bother with legal defenses, instead using their final public moments for defiant speeches or drunken spectacle. Given these grim prospects, what were the alternatives? Some pirates managed to secure pardons during periodic amnesty offers from colonial governments. These were politically motivated attempts to reduce piracy without the expense of naval campaigns. The most famous was the 1718 King's Pardon, which temporarily reduced pirate activity in the Caribbean as hundreds of pirates accepted clemency. Others attempted to retire quietly, taking their accumulated wealth, if they had any, to remote colonies or back to Europe, hoping their pasts wouldn't follow them. Some were successful. There are records of former pirates becoming plantation owners, merchants, or even respectable government officials. Many more likely disappeared into the working classes, taking their stories to the grave. A select few pirates attempted to legitimize their activities by becoming privateers, essentially licensed pirates who operated with the government's permission to attack the shipping of enemy nations. This letter of marque provided legal protection, at least from the issuing nation, and a more secure market for selling captured goods during wartime. Privateering was a lucrative and somewhat safer alternative to outright piracy. The least fortunate had no retirement plan at all. They simply continued until luck ran out, often drinking away whatever wealth they accumulated between voyages, trapped in a cycle of feast and famine that made saving for the future impossible. These career pirates usually met one of the ends described above: battle, disease, accident, or the noose. By the 1730s, the golden age of piracy was largely over. Increased naval patrols, better armed merchant vessels, more secure ports, and fewer wars, which had previously produced unemployed sailors ripe for recruitment, all contributed to the decline. The pirate havens of Nassau, Port Royal, and Tortuga were gradually brought under government control, eliminating safe harbors for outlaw ships. The romantic image of buried treasure providing retirement funds is largely mythical. While pirates certainly captured valuable cargo, they typically sold or traded it quickly rather than hoarding it. The rare exceptions, like Captain Kidd's buried treasure, became so famous precisely because they were unusual. So, the next time you fantasize about the freedom of the pirate life, remember that this freedom freedom came with an extremely high price and a very short expiration date. For most who flew the Black Flag, retirement wasn't a golden sunset of rum and riches. It was a gibbet, a hospital ship, or a watery grave. After exploring the day-to-day realities of pirate life, the disease, the violence, the terrible food, and the constant danger, we should address the question many of you are probably asking. If it was so awful, why did anyone choose to become a pirate in the first place? The answer reveals much about the economic and social conditions of the maritime world in the 17th and 18th centuries, and it's far more complex than simple greed or a taste for adventure. First and foremost, the alternatives were often worse. Life as a merchant sailor or naval seaman was, in many ways, just as brutal as piracy, but significantly less rewarding. Merchant sailors faced the same physical hardships, terrible food, cramped quarters, disease, and dangerous working conditions, but for miserable pay. Many went months or years without receiving wages, as unscrupulous captains and shipping companies found endless ways to deduct expenses from their earnings. Naval service was even worse. Press gangs forcibly recruited men in port cities, meaning many naval sailors never voluntarily chose the profession. Discipline was incredibly harsh. Floggings for minor infractions were routine, and hanging from the yardarm was always a possibility. The food was as bad as on pirate ships, the work just as dangerous, and the pay even lower. Against this backdrop, piracy offered several genuine advantages. The democratic governance of pirate ships meant ordinary sailors had a voice in decision-making, a radical concept in an era of absolute shipboard authority. The equitable distribution of prize money meant a common pirate could earn more in a few months than a merchant sailor might see in years. For the socially marginalized, piracy offered rare opportunities. Runaway slaves could find not just freedom, but equality and advancement based on skill rather than race. In an era when social mobility was virtually non-existent, a poor man with natural leadership abilities could rise to command a ship and crew, something unthinkable in naval or merchant service, where officer positions were reserved for the well-born or well-connected. Many pirates didn't set out to become outlaws. They began as ordinary sailors who experienced a conversion moment, often when their merchant ship was captured by pirates. Given the choice between joining the pirates or remaining loyal to their miserable legitimate employment, many volunteered for the pirate life on the spot. Others were former privateers who found themselves unemployed when wars ended, and their letters of marque were revoked. Having developed specialized skills in naval combat and prize-taking, they simply continued their work without government sanction. The line between privateer and pirate was often blurry and frequently crossed. The social aspect shouldn't be underestimated either. Pirate ships created their own culture, with shared values, language, and customs that stood in opposition to the rigid hierarchies of mainstream society. The sense of belonging to a community of outlaws, people who had chosen to step outside conventional rules, could be powerfully appealing, especially for those who had never experienced respect or agency in their previous lives. There was also the element of festival and carnival, the temporary inversion of normal social orders that was deeply appealing in a rigidly structured world. Pirates mocked authority, created elaborate alternative identities, and reveled in breaking taboos. The Black Flag itself was a theatrical prop in a performance of defiance and freedom. Of course, the economic motivation was real. The possibility of striking it rich, capturing a treasure galleon or merchant vessel packed with valuable cargo, kept many in the game despite the odds. Gambling psychology was at work. The next prize might be the big one, the score that would change everything. The reality rarely matched these dreams. Most pirates lived voyage to voyage, spending their shares almost immediately when they made port. The few who did accumulate substantial wealth often had no safe way to enjoy it, as they couldn't return to legitimate society without risking arrest and execution. By the 1720s, as naval enforcement increased and the romantic early days of the pirate republics faded, a darker motivation emerged. Some men turned to piracy out of desperation, knowing the risks but seeing no other options. These late-period pirates were often more violent and less discriminating in their targets, lacking the quasi-political political motivation of earlier generations. So, while we shouldn't romanticize pirates, they were, after all, criminal enterprises that used violence and theft as their business model. We should understand them as complex social actors responding to the harsh economic and political realities of their time. Pirates weren't just criminals. They were symptoms of deeply exploitative maritime labor practices and rigid social hierarchies that left many with few appealing alternatives. The pirates themselves would likely be amused by how we remember them today. They've been transformed from maritime criminals into cultural icons, their harsh realities sanitized into family-friendly adventure, their symbols repurposed for everything from sports teams to children's parties. The reality of their daily lives, the disease, violence, and misery we've explored in this journey, has been largely forgotten in favor of romantic myths. The real pirates of the Caribbean didn't have Hollywood good looks or witty catchphrases. They didn't search for cursed Aztec gold or magical tridents. They were working men who chose a dangerous, usually brief alternative to the exploitation of legitimate maritime work. They created democratic micro-societies that challenged the hierarchical norms of their day, all while engaging in theft, intimidation, and occasional violence. Their ships weren't pristine vessels with billowing sails and polished decks. They were often stolen, poorly maintained craft that leaked, creaked, and stank of humanity, packed too tightly together. Their captains weren't charming rogues with hearts of gold, but hardened survivors who maintained control through a mix of charisma, strategic thinking, and calculated violence. Yet, there is something in the pirate story that continues to resonate across centuries. Perhaps it's their rejection of authority, the creation of alternative social structures, or simply the eternal appeal of those who choose freedom at any cost. Whatever the reason, pirates have sailed from historical reality into the realm of legend, where they continue to capture our imagination, even as we forget the harsh truths of their existence. So, the next time you see a skull and crossbones, the Jolly Roger that once struck terror into the hearts of merchant sailors, remember the complex reality behind the symbol. It represented not just theft and violence, but also a radical experiment in self-governance, a desperate bid for freedom in an unfree world, and a community of outcasts who briefly created their own rules on the margins of empire. As we've sailed through the realities of pirate life, from the disgusting food to the primitive medicine, from the democratic governance to the short, often brutal careers, we've seen a world far removed from our comfortable modern existence. A world where survival itself was a daily victory, where violence and death were constant companions, and where freedom came with an extraordinarily high price. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep in your clean, comfortable bed, free from scurvy, lice, and the threat of naval pursuit, perhaps say a quiet thank you to modern medicine, indoor plumbing, and refrigeration, and maybe spare a thought for those desperate men who chose the Black Flag, not because they were inherently evil, but because in the brutal calculus of their time and place, piracy seemed like the least worst option. Their world has vanished beneath the waves of history, leaving behind only legends, exaggerations, and a handful of court records and first-hand accounts. The real pirates, hungry, sick, desperate, and brief, have been replaced by their mythic counterparts. Perhaps that's for the best. Some realities are too harsh for comfortable consumption. The golden age of piracy lasted barely a century, from approximately 1650 to 1730, with its peak in the early 1700s. It coincided with colonial expansion, emerging capitalism, and the development of transoceanic trade routes that created both the conditions for piracy to flourish and the wealth that made it worthwhile. As those conditions changed, as naval power increased, as merchant ships became better armed, as pirate havens fell under government control, the opportunities for successful piracy diminished. By the mid-18th century, pirates were already becoming more legend than reality in the Caribbean and Atlantic. They would continue to exist in other regions, the South China Sea, the Barbary Coast, and elsewhere. But the romantic era of Caribbean piracy was largely over. The survivors, those lucky few who escaped the noose and managed to accumulate some wealth, disappeared into the growing colonial societies of the Americas or returned to Europe, taking their stories with them. What they left behind was not buried treasure, but something more valuable and enduring, a mythology of freedom, however flawed and temporary, that continues to capture our imagination centuries later. The reality was disease, violence, and early death. The legend is adventure, autonomy, and defiance of authority. Perhaps we need both versions, the harsh truth to ground us, and the romantic myth to inspire us. Long before he was known as Blackbeard, the most feared pirate of the Golden Age, Edward Teach was simply a sailor. Born around 1680 in Bristol, England, he was just one of countless men who made their living from the sea, in an era when Britain was establishing itself as a maritime power. His early life remains largely unknown, a common fate for ordinary men in an age when only the wealthy and powerful had their histories carefully documented. What we do know is that Teach likely began his seafaring career as a privateer during Queen Anne's War, 1702 to 1713, licensed by the British Crown to attack French and Spanish ships. When the war ended in 1713, many privateers found themselves suddenly unemployed, their specialized skills in naval warfare and prize-taking no longer sanctioned by government authority. Some returned to merchant service or naval work. Others, like Teach, made the fateful decision to continue their profitable activities without legal permission. Teach's transformation from anonymous sailor to notorious pirate began around 1716, when he joined the crew of Captain Benjamin Hornigold, an established pirate operating from Nassau in the Bahamas. Nassau had become a pirate republic, a lawless haven where hundreds of pirates gathered, repaired their ships, sold their plunder, and enjoyed the absence of government authority. Hornigold recognized Teach's natural leadership abilities and knowledge of seamanship, promoting him to command a smaller vessel in his small fleet. This apprenticeship under an experienced pirate captain gave Teach the connections, knowledge, and confidence to eventually strike out on his own. By 1717, Teach had taken command of a captured French merchantman, renamed it the Queen Anne's Revenge, and begun to cultivate the fearsome image that would make him legendary. The ship itself was impressive, around 200 tons, 40 guns, and capable of outgunning many naval vessels of the time. But it was Teach's psychological warfare that truly set him apart. Understanding that reputation could be as powerful as actual violence, Blackbeard crafted a terrifying persona. He grew his black beard to an enormous length, weaving hemp fuses into it and lighting them during battle. These slow, burning fuses surrounded his face with smoke, giving him a demonic appearance that struck fear into the hearts of his victims. He dressed in dark clothing, armed himself with multiple pistols and knives, and cultivated rumors of superhuman strength and cruelty. Yet, behind this carefully constructed image was a calculating businessman. Blackbeard preferred intimidation to actual violence whenever possible. His fearsome reputation meant that many merchant captains surrendered without resistance rather than risk his rumored wrath, allowing him to capture ships with minimal damage to valuable cargo and without losing crew members in battle. At his peak in 1718, Blackbeard commanded a small fleet and hundreds of men. His audacious blockade of Charleston, South Carolina, where he held prominent citizens for ransom and demanded medical supplies, demonstrated both his strategic thinking and his understanding of publicity. The incident cemented his fearsome reputation and showed that even major colonial ports weren't safe from his reach. In an unexpected move that same year, Blackbeard accepted a royal pardon from Governor Charles Eden of North Carolina, seemingly retiring from piracy. He settled in the town of Bath, even marrying a local woman, his 14th or 16th wife by some accounts, though these numbers are likely exaggerated. He lived in a plantation house and seemed to be attempting a transition to legitimate life, but retirement didn't suit Edward Teach. Before long, he was back at sea, engaging in activities that straddled the line between legal privateering and outright piracy. He established an arrangement with Governor Eden that many historians believe was corrupt. Teach would bring prizes into North Carolina ports, where Eden would declare them legally seized, taking a share of the profits himself. This arrangement might have continued indefinitely, but Blackbeard's fame had made him too valuable a target. Governor Alexander Spotswood of Virginia, concerned about piracy affecting trade in the region and perhaps jealous of Eden's arrangement, dispatched Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy to hunt down the infamous pirate once and for all. On November 22nd, 1718, Maynard trapped Blackbeard's ship in Ocracoke Inlet, off the coast of North Carolina. The ensuing battle was the stuff of legend. Blackbeard fought ferociously, even after receiving multiple gunshot wounds. According to contemporaneous accounts, he was eventually felled only after receiving 5 gunshot wounds and 20 sword cuts. After his death, Maynard cut off Blackbeard's head and hung it from the bowsprit of his ship as proof of the pirate's demise. The body was thrown into the ocean, where legend claims it swam 7 times around the ship before sinking. One final myth in a life that had already become more legend than reality. Blackbeard's brief career, just 2 years as a notorious captain, demonstrates the typical trajectory of Golden Age piracy. A rapid rise, a brief period of spectacular success, and a violent, premature end. He was likely in his late 30s when he died, older than many of his contemporaries managed to survive in a profession where careers were measured in months rather than years. What made Blackbeard exceptional wasn't just his theatrical appearance or his strategic mind, but his understanding of brand management. Centuries before such a concept existed, he recognized that fear was a currency as valuable as gold, that reputation could be weaponized, and that the stories told about him would do much of his work for him. In that, he was correct beyond his wildest imagination. 3 centuries after his death at Ocracoke, Edward Teach, Blackbeard, remains the archetype of the pirate captain, his image instantly recognizable even to those who know nothing else about the historical reality of piracy. The bearded, fierce, almost supernatural pirate of our cultural imagination owes much to the deliberate self-creation of a man who understood the power of a good story. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you'll dream of the Queen Anne's Revenge cutting through Atlantic waves, of a bearded figure wreathed in smoke, standing at the helm, of a time when the boundaries between nations were fluid, and a man could, however briefly, declare himself outside their laws and power. Just remember that behind the romantic image was a reality of disease, violence, and desperate men making desperate choices in a world that offered them few better options. The life of a pirate was nasty, brutish, and short, filled with discomfort, danger, and the constant presence of death. Yet something in their brief experiment in freedom continues to call to us across the centuries, inviting us to wonder what we might have done in their place, faced with their limited choices in a world both simpler and infinitely harsher than our own. Now, as you feel the weight of sleep settling over you, remember that you're experiencing something pirates rarely enjoyed: safety, comfort, and the luxury of drifting off without fear of what tomorrow might bring. Rest easy, knowing that the age of sail, with all its wonders and horrors, has passed into history, leaving behind only stories, legends, and the occasional treasure, not of gold and jewels, but of insight into a world both utterly foreign and surprisingly familiar to our own. In many ways, the pirates of the Golden Age were ahead of their time. They created democratic systems of governance when most of the world lived under monarchies and autocracies. They established early forms of workers' compensation and health insurance through their articles. They created multicultural, multinational crews where skill mattered more than background. And they challenged the emerging capitalist order by seizing the means of maritime production and redistributing wealth according to their own rules. None of this erases the fact that they were also thieves and opportunists who used violence and intimidation to enrich themselves. The complexity of their story, neither wholly villainous nor purely heroic, is what makes them endlessly fascinating historical subjects, worthy of serious study beyond the caricatures of popular culture. As we end our journey through the harsh realities of pirate life, perhaps we can appreciate both versions of their story, the uncomfortable truth of their daily existence, and the enduring legend they've become. Each has something to teach us about human nature, about the lengths to which people will go for freedom and opportunity, and about how thin the veneer of civilization can be when pushed to its limits. Sleep well, knowing that the pirates have sailed into history, leaving the seas safer but perhaps a little less interesting than when they flew the Jolly Roger in defiance of empires. Their legends will continue to evolve and inspire, even as the historical reality fades, like a ship disappearing over the horizon, bound for that undiscovered country from which no traveler returns. Good night.